The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual noise of hundreds of different species. Translators hummed softly, converting alien languages into understandable words. The smell of various atmospheres mixed together in the carefully controlled air system. Chancellor Vex looked around the massive room, counting the delegates. Something felt wrong, but he could not figure out what it was. The Zephyrians sat in their floating chairs, their blue skin shimmering under the lights. The crystalline beings stood perfectly still like living statues made of diamond. The void, touched, floated in their dark corners, barely visible except for their glowing eyes. Then Vex realized what was missing. The human chair was empty. For over 200 years, humans had sat in that chair. They always spoke up during debates, always asked questions, always offered help with problems. Ambassador Chen had been there just last month, talking about trade agreements and peace treaties. Like always, Vex called his assistant over. "Where is the human delegate?" The young Altrurian looked confused. "Sir, they sent a message 3 weeks ago. They said they were leaving the council." "Leaving? What do you mean, leaving?" His assistant pulled up the official records on a small screen. "Here it is, sir. A formal withdrawal notice. Very polite. They thanked everyone for the years of cooperation and said they wished the council well in future endeavors." Vex read the message twice. It was short and simple. No complaints, no anger, no demands for changes. Just a polite goodbye. "Did anyone respond to this?" The Secretary General sent a standard acknowledgement, sir. That was all. Around the hall, other delegates were starting their usual business. The Zephyrians were arguing about mining rights. The crystalline hegemony was discussing trade routes. Nobody seemed to care about the empty human chair. Strange, Vex muttered to himself. Very strange. The council session went on as normal. Without human voices interrupting with questions or suggestions, the meetings actually moved faster. Many delegates seemed pleased about this. The Zephyrian speaker even made a joke about finally having productive discussions without unnecessary complications. But Vex could not shake his worry. In all his years on the council, humans had never missed a meeting. They were always there, always participating, always trying to help solve problems. For them to just leave quietly made no sense. After the session ended, Vex decided to investigate. He contacted the human embassy on the council world. A polite, automated message played. "The human embassy is now closed. All diplomatic matters have been transferred to local governments. Thank you for your understanding." This was getting more strange by the hour. Vex called his old friend, Trade Minister Kell, who worked closely with human merchants. "Kell, what do you know about the humans leaving the council?" There was silence on the other end of the call. Then Kell spoke slowly. "You know, now that you mention it, something odd has been happening. Human traders have been canceling contracts, not breaking them, mind you. They are following all the proper procedures, paying any fees, giving proper notice. But they are all leaving." "All of them?" "Well, not all at once. It started about 6 months ago. First the big trading companies, then the smaller ones. They said they were pursuing new opportunities or restructuring their operations. Very polite about it all. Vex felt a chill run down his spine. "What? About the colonies? The human settlements?" "That is the strangest part," Kell continued. "Reports are coming in from across the galaxy. Human colonies are evacuating. Not running away in panic, but organized, planned evacuations. They are packing everything up, cleaning their facilities, and leaving detailed instructions for whoever comes next." "Instructions for what?" "Maintenance manuals, mostly. How to run. The equipment they installed, how to maintain the systems they built. Very thorough stuff. Almost like they knew someone else would need to take over." After ending the call, Vex sat in his office for a long time, thinking. Humans had been part of galactic civilization for over 2 centuries. They had colonies on, hundreds of worlds, businesses in every major system, research stations in dozens of locations. They could not just pack up and leave overnight, but apparently they could. Over the next few days, more reports came in. Human research teams were shutting down their projects and leaving. Human doctors were finishing their current patients' treatments and then departing. Human engineers were completing their current jobs and then packing up their tools. Everywhere, the pattern was the same. Polite notices, proper procedures, detailed handover documents, and then quiet departures. No drama, no explanations beyond vague mentions of new opportunities or changing priorities. The strangest part was that nobody seemed particularly worried about it except Vex. Most council members were actually pleased. "Good riddance," said the Zephyrian representative. "Humans always complicated everything with their endless questions and suggestions." The crystalline hegemony calculated that human departure would improve trade efficiency by removing unnecessary intermediaries. The Void touched, simply noted the change without any emotional response, as was their way. But Vex remembered something his grandfather had told him many years ago. His grandfather had been one of the first Altrurians to meet humans when they joined the galactic community. "Be careful with those humans, boy," the old man had said. "They are helpful to a fault. Almost too helpful. Makes you wonder what they are really up to." At the time, Vex had thought his grandfather was just being paranoid. Humans seemed genuinely eager to help, genuinely interested in making friends, genuinely committed to peace and cooperation. They had never started wars, never made unreasonable demands, never caused serious problems. Maybe that was the problem. Vex pulled up historical records and started studying human involvement in galactic affairs. What he found surprised him. Humans were everywhere, not just as traders or colonists, but as advisors, consultants, technicians, and specialists. They had quietly made themselves useful in nearly every aspect of galactic civilization. When the Kepler system had problems with their atmospheric processors, humans had fixed them. When the trade routes through the Andromeda Passage became inefficient, humans had redesigned them. When different species had trouble communicating, humans had improved the translation systems. For 2 centuries, humans had been solving problems, improving systems, and making life better for everyone. They had done it so quietly and efficiently that most people had stopped noticing. Human help had become as natural and expected as gravity or starlight. Now they were leaving, and Vex was starting to understand why that might be a much bigger problem than anyone realized. He tried to contact human officials directly, but their communication networks had gone silent. Not destroyed or damaged, just deactivated. The humans were still out there, still moving through space, but they were no longer answering calls from other species. Long-range sensors tracked human ships heading toward the outer edges of the galaxy, toward regions that most civilizations considered too dangerous or too empty to bother with. The ships moved with purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going. As Vex sat in his office late that night looking out at the stars, he had a terrible thought. What if the humans had not been leaving because they were unhappy with the Council? What if they had been planning this departure for much longer than anyone realized? What if their 2 centuries of helpful cooperation had been preparation for something else entirely? He shook his head, trying to dismiss such paranoid thoughts. Humans were friends, allies, partners in building a peaceful galaxy. They would never do anything to harm the other species. But as he looked at that empty chair in the council hall, Vex could not shake the feeling that the galaxy was about to discover just how much they had depended on their human friends. And just how much trouble they were all in now that those friends were gone. 3 months had passed since the last human ship disappeared beyond the galaxy's edge. At first, life seemed to continue normally. Trade flowed, governments functioned, and the daily business of civilization carried on without interruption. Then, the problems started. Dr. Zexhai was working late in her research laboratory on Kepler 7 when the lights flickered. She looked up from her microscope, annoyed by the interruption. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the lab in dim red light. Zexhai heard the hum of the life support systems change pitch, becoming strained and irregular. She rushed to the main control panel and stared at the readings in confusion. The atmospheric processors were failing. Not all at once, but slowly, like a machine winding down. Oxygen levels were dropping gradually, and the temperature controls were becoming erratic. The backup systems were trying to compensate, but they were not designed to handle the full load. Zexhai called the maintenance department. "We have a problem with the life support systems in Section 7. "We know," came the tired voice of the maintenance chief. "We have problems in sections 3, 5, 8, and 12 as well. The whole system is acting up." "What is causing it?" There was a long pause. "We are not sure. The computers say everything should be working fine, but clearly something is wrong. We are trying to figure it out." HFY spent the next few hours helping evacuate sensitive equipment from her lab as the environmental systems continued to degrade. It was only when she was reviewing the maintenance logs that she noticed something strange. 5 years ago, a team of human engineers had performed routine upgrades to the atmospheric processors. The work had been so smooth and professional that nobody had questioned it. The humans had improved efficiency by 30% and reduced maintenance needs significantly. Everyone had been grateful for their help. But now HFY wondered what exactly those improvements had involved. She pulled up the technical documentation the humans had left behind. It was thorough and detailed, but as she read through it, she realized it described how to maintain systems she did not fully understand. The humans had not just improved the existing atmospheric processors. They had essentially replaced them with something far more advanced, but also far more complex. The new systems required constant small adjustments, tiny calibrations, and subtle modifications that the documentation described but did not fully explain. It was like being given instructions for flying a starship when you had only ever ridden in ground vehicles. The words made sense individually, but the overall concept was beyond her expertise. Across the galaxy, similar problems were emerging. On the trading world of Nexus Prime, the automated cargo handling systems began making mistakes. Shipments were misrouted, containers were lost, and loading schedules became chaotic. The supervisor, a crystalline being named Hextar, discovered that the systems had been optimized by human programmers 3 years earlier. The optimization had been remarkable. Cargo throughput had increased by 40% while reducing errors to nearly zero. But now, without the human technicians who had regularly updated and maintained the software, the systems were slowly breaking down. Hextar tried to understand the human-modified code, but it was like trying to read poetry written in mathematics. The logic was elegant and complex, with thousands of interconnected subroutines that all depended on each other in ways that were not immediately obvious. The worst part was that the original, simpler systems had been completely replaced. There was no going back to the old way of doing things without rebuilding everything from scratch. Similar stories were emerging from across the galaxy. Agricultural worlds discovered that their enhanced crop yields were dropping as genetically modified. Seeds failed to reproduce properly without human biotechnicians. Manufacturing planets found that their automated factories were producing increasing numbers of defective products as the human-designed quality control systems slowly degraded. Communication networks that had flawlessly connected hundreds of different species for decades began experiencing translation errors and connection failures. The elegant protocols that allowed a void touch to speak directly to a Zephyrian, with perfect understanding on both sides, were apparently much more complex than anyone had realized. Chancellor Vex watched the reports pile up on his desk with growing alarm. Each individual problem seemed manageable, even minor. But taken together, they painted a disturbing picture. The humans had not just participated in galactic civilization, they had quietly become essential to its basic functioning. They had upgraded, optimized, and improved so many systems that their sudden absence was causing a cascade of failures across hundreds of worlds. Vex called an emergency council session to address the growing crisis. The response was mixed. Some delegates were genuinely worried, but others dismissed the problems as temporary inconveniences. "These are minor technical difficulties," declared the Zephyrian representative. "Our engineers will figure out solutions." The crystalline hegemony agreed. "Efficiency may decrease temporarily, but our calculations show that adaptation is possible within acceptable timeframes." But as the days passed, the problems multiplied faster than solutions could be found. The human-modified systems were not just advanced. They were integrated into everything else in ways that made them nearly impossible to replace or repair. It was like discovering that the foundation of your house was more complex than you had realized, and the person who built it had taken all the blueprints with them when they left. Vex tried again to contact the departed humans, but their communications networks remained silent. Long-range sensors occasionally detected human ships in the outer regions of the galaxy, but they did not respond to any attempts at contact. More disturbing, the sensors suggested that the human ships were not just wandering aimlessly. They were moving with coordination and purpose, gathering in specific regions and conducting activities that the sensors could not identify. Meanwhile, the crisis on inhabited worlds continued to worsen. Several agricultural colonies had to be evacuated as their life support systems failed completely. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades became bottlenecked and inefficient. Research stations lost years of data as their storage. Systems crashed without proper maintenance. Dr. Zexhai finally managed to get her laboratory's life support partially restored, but only by bypassing most of the human improvements and running the systems at minimal efficiency. The air was breathable but barely, and the temperature fluctuated uncomfortably. "I do not understand," she told her assistant, a young Altrurian named Kess. "How did we become so dependent on human technology without realizing it?" Kess had been studying the problem from a different angle. "I think that was the point," he said slowly. "Look at the pattern. Humans never imposed their technology on anyone. They always offered improvements to existing systems. Small upgrades that made things work better. So we never realized we were becoming dependent. Each improvement seemed minor by itself, but they all connected to each other, and they all required human knowledge to maintain properly." Zexhai stared at the maintenance documentation scattered across her desk. Thousands of pages of technical specifications, all describing systems that were too advanced for anyone but humans to fully understand. "It is almost like they planned this," she said quietly. Kess nodded. "That is what worries me. What if they did?" Across the galaxy, other scientists, engineers, and administrators were having similar conversations. The humans had been so helpful, so generous with their knowledge and expertise, but their help had come with hidden strings attached, strings that only became visible after they cut them all at once. As the 4th month of the crisis began, Chancellor Vex received a report that made his blood run cold. Long-range sensors had detected massive energy signatures from the galactic rim, where the human ships had been gathering. The humans were building something out there, something big enough to show up on sensors from thousands of light years away. For the first time since the humans had left, Vex wondered if they had ever really been the helpful junior partners they had seemed to be. And if not, what had the galaxy just lost by letting them go? More importantly, what were they planning to do with their newfound freedom? The failure of the galactic banking network happened on a Tuesday. Trade Minister Kell was reviewing quarterly economic reports when his computer screen went blank. For a moment, he thought it was just another system glitch, like the dozens that had been plaguing various installations across the galaxy. But when the screen came back online, the numbers displayed made no sense. Currency exchange rates were fluctuating wildly. The Zephyrian credit, stable for over a century, had lost 40% of its value in the space of an hour. The crystalline standard was experiencing similar chaos. Even the rock-solid Altrurian mark was beginning to wobble. Kell called the Central Banking Authority in a panic. "What is happening to the currency markets?" The voice on the other end sounded strained. "We are not entirely sure. The automatic stabilization systems are malfunctioning. Currency exchanges that normally happen smoothly are being rejected by the verification protocols. Can you fix it?" There was a long pause. "We are trying, but the stabilization systems were upgraded by human financial experts about 10 years ago. The upgrades were supposed to make everything more efficient and secure. They worked perfectly. Until now." Kell felt his stomach sink. "Let me guess. The humans did not leave clear instructions on how to maintain these upgrades." "They left instructions. Very detailed ones, but they assume knowledge that we apparently do not have. The mathematical models they use are incredibly sophisticated. Our best economists are struggling to understand even the basic principles." Within hours, the currency crisis had spread across the entire galaxy. Automated trading systems, designed to respond to market changes, began making increasingly erratic decisions. Without the human-designed stabilization protocols working properly, small fluctuations became massive swings. Businesses that had operated successfully for decades suddenly found themselves unable to complete basic transactions. Colonies that depended on imported food discovered that they could no longer afford to buy supplies. Trade routes that had been profitable became economically impossible overnight. The crisis was not limited to finance. As businesses failed and supply chains collapsed, other systems began to break down as well. On the agricultural world of Harvest 3, Farmer Getka watched his crops dying in the fields. The genetically modified seeds that humans had provided years ago had produced amazing yields with minimal effort. But now, without the specific fertilizers and treatments that only human biotechnicians knew how to make, the plants were withering. Worse, the modified soil itself was becoming barren. The human improvements had created a delicate ecosystem that required constant management. Without that management, the soil was actually less fertile than it had been before the humans arrived. Getka was not the only one facing this problem. Agricultural worlds across the galaxy were reporting crop failures as human-modified organisms broke down without proper support. Food shortages began appearing in systems that had been self-sufficient for generations. Meanwhile, on the crystal cities of the hegemony homeworld, structural engineer Nextal noticed hairline cracks appearing in buildings that had stood perfectly for 50 years. The crystal structures were beginning to resonate at dangerous frequencies, threatening to shatter under their own vibrations. Nextal checked the construction records and found what he feared. Human engineers had installed harmonic dampeners throughout the crystal cities decades ago. The devices had eliminated the resonance problems that had plagued crystalline architecture for centuries. But now those dampeners were failing without proper calibration. The beautiful crystal cities, marvels of engineering and art, were slowly destroying themselves. The resonant frequencies that the dampeners had suppressed were building up again, but the crystal structures were no longer designed to handle them. Similar problems were emerging everywhere. Transportation networks designed with human logistics expertise were becoming hopelessly snarled. Medical facilities lost the ability to treat certain diseases as human-developed treatments became unavailable. Research stations found themselves unable to continue projects that depended on human theoretical frameworks. But perhaps the most critical failure was in the communication systems that held galactic civilization together. The Great Network, which allowed instant communication between any 2 points in the galaxy, began experiencing cascading failures. Messages were delayed, corrupted, or lost entirely. The translation protocols that enabled different species to understand each other started producing increasingly garbled results. Chancellor Vex found himself unable to coordinate effectively with other council members as their meetings became exercises in confusion and frustration. What had once been smooth diplomatic discussions turned into chaotic attempts to communicate through degraded translation systems. "This is unacceptable," declared the Zephyrian representative during one particularly difficult session. "We must find a way to restore the communication network immediately." "Agreed," said the crystalline delegate, though the translation made it sound like they had said flavored instead. "Our efficiency calculations show that current communication delays are reducing productivity by 67%. The void." Touch delegate tried to contribute to the discussion, but the translator rendered their carefully chosen words as complete nonsense. Frustrated, they switched to manual translation devices, which worked but were slow and clumsy. Vex realized that the communication breakdown was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Without reliable communication, the various species were beginning to misunderstand each other's intentions. Trade disputes were escalating into diplomatic incidents. Military commanders were having trouble coordinating with their allies. The galaxy was not just losing its technology, it was losing its ability to function as a unified civilization. As the 6th month of the crisis began, casualty reports started arriving. Colonies with failed life support systems had suffered thousands of deaths. Worlds with collapsed food distribution networks were experiencing famine. Medical facilities overwhelmed by diseases they could no longer treat were reporting soaring mortality rates. The Galactic Council tried to organize relief efforts, but their attempts were hampered by communication failures, transportation breakdowns, and economic chaos. Ships sent to deliver aid sometimes arrived to find that the colonies they were meant to help had already been abandoned. Vex spent sleepless nights reviewing reports and trying to coordinate responses. The scope of the crisis was beyond anything the galaxy had ever faced. It was not a war or a natural disaster, but something worse, the slow collapse of the fundamental systems that made interstellar civilization possible. In desperation, he authorized long-range expeditions to try to contact the departed humans. The expeditions found traces of human activity in the outer regions of the galaxy, but no humans themselves. They discovered abandoned construction sites with massive foundations and partially built structures that served no obvious purpose. More disturbing, they found evidence that the humans had been preparing for their departure far longer than anyone had realized. Some of the construction sites showed signs of activity dating back decades. The humans had been quietly building something in secret while simultaneously making themselves indispensable to galactic civilization. As Vex studied the expedition reports, a terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. What if the humans had not simply left to find new opportunities? What if they had been planning this crisis all along? The thought was almost too horrible to consider. The humans had been friends, allies, trusted partners for over 2 centuries. They had helped solve countless problems, prevented numerous wars, and contributed immeasurably to galactic prosperity and peace. But they had also, apparently, made it impossible for that prosperity and peace to continue without them. Vex looked out his office window at the lights of the Council World's capital city. Many of those lights were dimmer now, as power systems struggled without human maintenance. The sky, once filled with the trails of countless ships, was nearly empty as transportation networks failed. The galaxy was dying slowly, starving without the human expertise that had quietly become its lifeblood. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the galactic edge, the humans were building something with the knowledge and resources they had spent 2 centuries carefully gathering. For the first time in his long life, Chancellor Vex was afraid. Not just of the crisis engulfing the galaxy, but of what might happen when the humans decided to return. Because he was beginning to suspect that they would return. The question was whether they would come back as saviors or conquerors, and whether there would be any meaningful difference between the two. Chancellor Vex stood in the abandoned human cultural center on the Council World, surrounded by empty displays and silent exhibits. Dust covered the artifacts that had once celebrated 2 centuries of human participation in galactic civilization. The building had been locked since the humans departed, but Vex had convinced the authorities to let him search it for clues. He was looking for anything that might explain what the humans had really been doing all this time. As the galaxy continued its slow collapse around him, Vex had become obsessed with understanding the truth about humanity's role in galactic civilization. In a storage room behind the main exhibits, Vex found what he was looking for: boxes of records, documents, and data storage devices that the humans had left behind. Unlike the technical manuals they had provided for maintaining their systems, these records appeared to be personal files, historical documents, and research notes. Vex spent hours going through the materials, and what he found made his blood run cold. The humans had been mapping the galaxy. Not just exploring it or trading with it, but systematically documenting every inhabited world, every resource deposit, every technological capability, every military strength, and every political weakness of every species they encountered. The records went back over 200 years, starting from humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. Even in those early years, when humans had seemed like eager newcomers grateful for acceptance into the galactic community, they had been quietly gathering intelligence with methodical precision. Vex found detailed analyses of Zephyrian mining, operations including information about security systems and extraction techniques that should have been classified. There were comprehensive studies of crystalline manufacturing processes, complete with chemical formulas and structural specifications. The records included psychological profiles of major political leaders, economic analyses of trade dependencies, and strategic assessments of military capabilities. But the most disturbing documents were the ones labeled integration protocols. These files contained detailed plans for how to make human assistance indispensable to other species. The plans were sophisticated beyond anything Vex had imagined. They described how to identify critical systems, how to offer improvements that created dependencies, and how to gradually replace alien technology with human alternatives without the recipients realizing what was happening. One document, titled Atmospheric Processing Initiative, Phase 3, described the exact upgrades that had been made to Dr. Zexhai's laboratory. The upgrades were not random improvements, but carefully designed modifications that would fail without human maintenance. The document even predicted how long the systems would continue to function after human support was withdrawn. Another file detailed the Communication Network Enhancement Project. Vex realized with growing horror that the translation protocols that had allowed different species to communicate seamlessly were not just human improvements to existing systems. They were entirely human creations, designed from the beginning to require human oversight to function properly. The humans had not been helping to improve galactic civilization. They had been systematically replacing it with their own version, a version that could not survive without them. Vex found records of meetings he had never known about, conversations between human officials discussing the progress of various integration initiatives. They talked about other species like scientists discussing laboratory subjects, analyzing their behaviors, predicting their responses, and adjusting their strategies accordingly. Phase 4 of the Agricultural Enhancement Program has exceeded expectations, read one report. Subject species are now completely dependent on human biotechnology for food production. Withdrawal of support will result in widespread famine within 6 months, as predicted. Another document discussed the financial systems. Banking network integration is complete. All major currencies are now dependent on human stabilization protocols. Economic collapse following our departure should occur within 90 days, creating optimal conditions for renegotiation of relationships. As Vex read through hundreds of these files, a picture emerged of a plan so vast and patient that it took his breath away. The humans had spent 2 centuries carefully inserting themselves into every aspect of galactic civilization, not as partners or allies, but as puppet masters pulling invisible strings. They had identified every critical system, every essential service, every vital process that kept the galaxy functioning. Then they had quietly made themselves indispensable to all of them, while making sure that no one else understood how the systems really worked. The most chilling document was labeled Exodus Protocol, Final Phase. It outlined the systematic withdrawal that was now taking place, complete with timelines for when various systems would fail and predictions about how different species would respond to the crisis. According to the plan, the chaos and desperation would continue for exactly 2 years. Long enough for the galaxy to understand how completely they depended on human expertise, but not long enough for them to develop alternatives. Then, when the surviving civilizations were at their weakest, the humans would return with an offer of salvation. But they would not return as the humble partners they had pretended to be. They would return as the acknowledged masters of galactic civilization, offering to restore order in exchange for permanent authority over all strategic decisions. Vex found a personal journal that belonged to Ambassador Chen's predecessor, a human named Director Sarah Martinez. The final entries revealed the true scope of human ambitions. The integration phase is nearly complete. Every major system in the galaxy now depends on human knowledge and expertise. The other species think they are our equals, our partners in building a peaceful future. They have no idea that they have become our subjects. We have been patient for over 2 centuries, slowly weaving ourselves into the fabric of their civilization. When we withdraw, that fabric will unravel completely. The galaxy will tear itself apart trying to maintain systems they do not understand, fighting over resources they cannot properly manage, struggling with technologies they are not equipped to handle. Then we will return, not as supplicants begging for acceptance, but as the rightful rulers of a galactic empire. We will offer them order, prosperity, and peace. They will accept our terms gratefully, because the alternative will be the continued collapse of everything they hold dear. The most beautiful part of the plan is that they will thank us for it. We will be their saviors, their benefactors, their wise leaders who rescued them from chaos. They will never understand that we created that chaos deliberately. Vex set down the journal with shaking hands. The scope of human deception was beyond anything he had imagined. For 2 centuries, every human smile, every offer of help, every gesture of friendship had been part of an elaborate strategy to achieve dominance over the entire galaxy. The humans had not conquered through war or intimidation. They had conquered through patience, competence, and careful manipulation. They had made themselves so useful, so reliable, so utterly essential that their absence would destroy everything they touched. And according to the timelines in their files, they were planning to return soon. Vex gathered the most important documents and rushed back to the council chambers. He had to warn the other delegates, had to make them understand what they were really facing. The galaxy was not just experiencing technical difficulties or economic problems. They were living through the final stages of the most sophisticated conquest in galactic history. But when he arrived at the council building, he found it nearly empty. Many delegates had returned to their home worlds to deal with local crises. Others had lost the ability to travel as transportation networks continued to fail. The few remaining representatives were struggling just to keep basic communications working. As Vex looked around the nearly deserted chamber, he realized that the human plan was working perfectly. The galactic government was collapsing along with everything else. Soon there would be no organized resistance left, no unified authority capable of opposing human demands. The humans had not just made themselves indispensable to galactic technology and economy, they had engineered the complete collapse of galactic political authority, clearing the way for their return as the galaxy's new masters. In the distance, Vex could see the lights of ships approaching the council world. Long-range sensors had detected a massive fleet moving in from the galactic rim. After 2 years of silence, the humans were finally coming home. But they were not coming as friends. They were coming as conquerors, who had already won their war before anyone realized it had begun. 2 years after the humans disappeared, Chancellor Vex stood on the observation deck of the council station, watching the stars through reinforced glass. Half the lights that had once sparkled across the galaxy were now dark. Entire systems had gone silent. Their civilizations collapsed or abandoned. The great galactic community that had thrived for millennia had been reduced to scattered pockets of survivors struggling to maintain basic services. The death toll had been staggering. Conservative estimates put the number at over 12 billion, beings across hundreds of worlds. Some had died in system failures, others in the famines that followed agricultural collapse, and many more in the wars that broke out as desperate civilizations fought over dwindling resources. Vex himself looked much older than his years. The stress of trying to coordinate relief efforts with failing communication systems and collapsing transportation networks had taken its toll. He had watched helplessly as the galaxy tore itself apart, knowing that every failure had been predicted and planned by human strategists centuries ago. The few remaining council delegates met in a much smaller chamber now. Where once hundreds of species had debated the future of galactic civilization, now barely 24 representatives could gather. Many worlds had lost the ability to maintain interstellar communications. Others had withdrawn from galactic affairs, entirely focusing all their efforts on local survival. The Zephyrian delegate, once proud and arrogant, now looked exhausted and defeated. His people had abandoned most of their mining operations when the automated systems failed completely. The crystalline hegemony had watched their beautiful cities crack and crumble as the harmonic dampeners broke down. Even the emotionless void. Touched seemed different, less certain, less confident in their observations. It was during one of these sparse council meetings that the message arrived. The communication came through channels that had been silent for 2 years. Clear, crisp, and transmitted with technology that made the surviving galactic networks look primitive by comparison. The message was simple: coordinates to a meeting point in neutral space, and a single line of text. Ready to discuss terms. Admiral Sarah Chen, Human Expeditionary Command. The debate among the remaining delegates was brief and bitter. Some wanted to refuse the meeting, to deny the humans the satisfaction of dictating terms. Others argued that they had no choice but to listen to whatever the humans offered. Vex knew the truth that most of the others refused to accept. They were no longer in a position to negotiate as equals. The galaxy was dying, and the humans held the only cure. The meeting took place 3 days later at the coordinates specified by the humans. Vex led a small delegation aboard one of the few remaining council ships capable of interstellar travel. The vessel was old and poorly maintained, its systems barely functional after 2 years without proper human-built components. When they arrived at the rendezvous point, Vex understood immediately how completely the balance of power had shifted. The human fleet that waited for them was massive beyond comprehension. Ships larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen floated in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with technologies that seemed decades ahead of anything Vex had thought possible. The smallest escort vessels were larger than the council's. flagship. The command ship at the center of the formation was the size of a small moon. As their shuttle approached the human flagship, Vex noticed that the ship showed no signs of recent construction. Their hulls were weathered by long journeys, their designs mature and tested. These were not vessels hastily built during the 2 years of human absence. They were the products of decades or perhaps centuries of secret development. The humans had not spent 2 years building a fleet. They had spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment while pretending to be humble partners in galactic civilization. The docking bay of the human flagship was larger than most space stations. Automated systems guided their shuttle to a landing platform with efficiency that made Vex remember how smoothly things used to work when humans were managing galactic infrastructure. Admiral Sarah Chen was waiting for them in a conference room that was both elegant and intimidating. She was a tall woman with graying hair and calm eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform was simple but perfectly fitted, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who held absolute power. Behind her stood a small group of human advisors, each representing different aspects of human expertise: military, economic, technological, and diplomatic. They all shared the same calm confidence, the same sense of being exactly where they belonged. "Chancellor Vex," Admiral Chen said, gesturing to chairs arranged around a conference table. "Thank you for coming. Please sit. We have much to discuss." Vex took his seat, acutely aware of how shabby his delegation looked compared to their hosts. The surviving council representatives were worn down by years of crisis, their uniforms patched and faded, their equipment outdated and barely functional. "Before we begin," Admiral Chen continued, "I want to express our sincere regret for the suffering that has occurred across the galaxy. The loss of life has been tragic, and we take no pleasure in the pain that our departure has caused." The words sounded sincere, but Vex remembered the documents he had found in the Human Cultural Center. Every death, every collapse, every moment of suffering had been predicted and planned by human strategists. "However," the Admiral continued, "this crisis has made clear something that should have been obvious years ago. The galaxy requires leadership that can provide stability, security, and prosperity for all its inhabitants. The old council system, with its endless debates and competing interests, was simply not adequate for the challenges of managing an interstellar civilization." She activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked collapsed systems, yellow areas indicated regions in crisis, and tiny green dots showed the few remaining stable civilizations. "This is unacceptable," Admiral Chen said simply. "Billions of intelligent beings deserve better than chaos and suffering. They deserve a government that actually works, technology that can be relied upon, and leadership that puts their welfare above political games." "And you believe humanity should provide that leadership?" Vex asked, though he already knew the answer. "We know we should," the Admiral replied without hesitation. "For 2 centuries, we have been the ones actually keeping galactic civilization functioning. Not through grand speeches or political maneuvering, but through competent management of the systems that matter. Now that those systems have failed, the results speak for themselves." She gestured to another display showing the human fleet and construction projects on the galactic rim. "While the galaxy has been collapsing, we have been building. New technologies, new ships, new facilities capable of supporting a truly stable, interstellar civilization. We have solved the problems that the old system could never address." Vex looked at the images of massive space stations, advanced manufacturing facilities, and research installations that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever produced. The humans had not just been preparing to return, they had been preparing to rebuild galactic civilization from scratch according to their own design. "What are your terms?" Vex asked quietly. Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time Vex saw genuine warmth in her expression. "Our terms are generous, Chancellor. We offer to restore full functionality to every system we previously maintained. We will end the famine, repair the infrastructure, restore the communication networks, and stabilize the economies. Within 5 years, the galaxy will be more prosperous and peaceful than it has ever been." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for recognition of reality," the Admiral said simply. "Humanity will assume responsibility for all strategic decisions affecting galactic civilization. We will manage interstellar infrastructure, coordinate resource distribution, oversee technological development, and maintain peace between species. She activated another display showing a proposed governmental structure. Local governments will retain authority over their own internal affairs. Species will continue to manage their homeworlds as they see fit. But decisions affecting multiple systems, trade policies, military matters, and technological development will be made by human administrators with the expertise to make them correctly. Vex studied the proposal carefully. It was not exactly slavery, but it was not freedom either. The galaxy would become a human protectorate, with other species reduced to the status of junior partners in their own civilization. "And if we refuse?" asked the Zephyrian delegate. Admiral Chen's expression did not change, but her voice became cooler. "Then you are free to continue trying to solve these problems on your own. We will not interfere with any species that prefers independence to prosperity." The threat was implicit but clear. The humans would help those who accepted their terms and ignore those who did not. Given the current state of the galaxy, independence meant death. The discussion continued for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. One by one, the surviving delegates accepted the human terms. They had no real choice. Their civilizations were dying, and the humans offered the only hope of salvation. When the formal agreements were signed, Admiral Chen's demeanor became warmer again.